see. So we're recording and I'm doing a live stream, and it's supposed to be going onto YouTube, but I don't know if it really is going to YouTube. So, and I don't know if anybody can see this, so I'm going to try, let's see.
There should be a record of it, if nothing else.
Nope, that's not, okay, hold on, I'm gonna...
Do you have any idea what the numbers are as far as detransitioners?
Oh, okay. You know what? We are live.
Oh boy.
So I'm going to post on Twitter. Live streaming right now with an elderly resident of trans experience. Speaking about HB 2002. Please join us. Okay, I'm tweeting that, and then hopefully some people will come and find us. And I don't know how this is going to work. So if anybody is watching this, this is my first time doing a live stream, spur of the moment. And I am joined here by someone who goes by the name of Sarah, an elderly Oregon resident of trans experience who recently reached out to me saying, I saw your testimony and I'm with you. Sarah, you are personal friends with the state representative I have been trying to get through to. I mean, one of them. And Rep. Nose, and you said that you even talked to him earlier today. So I just thought it would be great to sort of reach hands across the aisle, not to say like a left or right issue, but just sort of bridge some worlds here and come together and talk about this. Because, you know, when I testified recently against Oregon House Bill 2458, the people who went first in support of the bill, they warned the representatives that you're going to hear from Christian ex-gays who say that Jesus saved them. And so they were very surprised to hear from me. I'm not a Christian ex-gay. I wasn't there to talk about conversion therapy of gay people and why it's a good thing that should be allowed. I was there to address it from a much different angle than they were expecting. But I still know that, you know, going into a meeting like this, as unfortunate as it is, I can't necessarily count on my state representatives not to have a preconceived notion of, you know, who I am or where I'm coming from when I want to disagree with a bill that they're, you know, they personally think sounds great. So I know that you personally have this relationship with one of our state representatives that goes back since long before he was a state representative. And so I just wanted to invite you to share your experience and why it is that you reached out to me, what it is that you want our state representatives to understand. And then maybe we can sort of go over some of the bill that's being proposed right now, and I can get your thoughts. I know you haven't read it, but if we just sort of talk about what's in the bill.
Well, I reached out because I saw your testimony, and you were saying a lot of things that I was wishing I would say in such a hearing, but I don't even remember what all it was, but it was just common sense, really. I'm a fan of common sense, and there isn't much common sense when it comes to this whole gender stuff. But my main concern is minors. I've been just vehemently opposed to the transitioning of minors since I first heard that it was happening. I find it unbelievable that it is happening. And just to be clear, I'm not only not a Christian, I'm pretty much an avid atheist. I've argued with Christians my whole life and religious people in general. I'm not a Republican. I've never voted Republican. So I'm left wing on every issue except this one. And it's not motivated by religion. It's motivated by my own experience of everything I've gone through as a trans person, and the fact that I'm concerned about the future because I don't really know what the numbers are, but I know that the number of transitioners, detransitioners, is just, what's the word? Just automatically minimized by trans activists. And I personally think there's hundreds, if not thousands, of them. And we're only hearing from the ones who have the nerve to come out and say so. And the reason I say that is because Sweden has banned the transitioning of minors. Sweden is not a religious country. In fact, it's 80% secular, and it's a left-wing country. It's a socialist country. In the it's a free market socialist country. It's not pure socialism, but they're not conservative there. And the only reason that they would do that is if there's so many, I'll say, undesirable outcomes, and that's why they stopped it. It's just the diagnosis is unreliable. It's most likely, and there's evidence of this, a social contagion, which young girls in particular are prone to. And I don't know, it's just, I could really go on, but it's not sane to
And
be
I
doing this to children.
don't worry, I have plenty of follow-up questions for you. I'm just going to
Okay.
pause and check because I kind of worried that I was going to mess it up what they're doing from my computer. So I'm going to look instead at my Twitter post and see if the link that I posted is working. So if you are watching and this is working, then bear with me. Oh, yep. Okay, that was a little meta moment there. Okay, so I think it's working properly, so we can just continue with the conversation.
Okay.
So you say that part of why you express these concerns is because of your own experience. And just to remind those who are listening and watching, we are just jumping into this without having ever met before. All that happened was I got an email from you yesterday, right when I was about to talk to one of my state representatives, and I was thinking, I was just starting to look at the bill because I've been absorbed, up until this point, I've been absorbed in some other things. And then we have this big bill that's being voted on Monday. And I was just getting a chance to look at it yesterday. And that's the same day that you emailed me. And that just felt really serendipitous. And with everything going on right now with regard to House Bill 2002, I thought, let's just hop on a call and help you share what you have to say with our state representatives and anyone else who's paying attention. So, a lot of people who are pushing for legislation like what you see in House Bill 2002 would probably claim to be speaking for people like yourself. And so you're sort of a heretic for saying, I am a person of trans experience and I disagree with this. So I don't know anything about your background. Can you tell us about what you've been through? To
My
the extent.
first memory of this life, which was 70 years ago, was hiding in my sister's closet with one of her dresses on. So literally my earliest memory of this life is feeling like I wanted to be a girl. And that kind of persisted through my childhood. It got really intense during puberty. So I certainly understand the idea of puberty blockers. But I can tell you that if my parents would have, well, I never told them until I was an adult, but if my parents would have affirmed me, I would have thought they were completely crazy. I would have been scared
What makes you say
because
that?
it's just, what's that?
What makes you say that?
Because I think even as a child, I knew that there was something wrong with this, that, this is not normal, which is why I never told anybody. I didn't tell anybody until I was 21 when I finally went to see a psychiatrist because I was going completely crazy. The
Without knowing more of your story, just based on what you've shared so far, I think it's really interesting that you're coming with this perspective because a lot of people who are pushing for the widespread use and implementation of puberty blockers in children who are otherwise healthy, in other words, puberty blockers off label, to interfere with normal development. A lot of the people pushing for that are in a similar demographic to you. In other words, older trans identified males who've gone through various procedures and hormones, perhaps, who say, my life would have been better if I'd done this earlier because I had to go through this puberty that made my bone structure obviously male and I don't pass as well and I would be happier. And it's sort of so it's what they imagine their life would have been like, and there's a lot of what ifs in there. But that's sort of the argument that's used to say that puberty blockers are supposedly a good thing for gender dysphoric children. Now, you're saying you were a gender dysphoric child from as early as you can remember, and you are somebody who did go through various medical steps as an adult to medically transition. Although I don't know what those steps are because I don't know your story yet. And yet you're saying that you don't think it would have been wise if puberty blockers and these early treatments had been offered to you. So, what makes you say that?
I think I had a sense even when I was very young and approaching puberty. So before puberty, it was just sort of my secret game. I would pretend to be a girl. I even had imaginary playmates who were girls. But when I was about 13, a friend of mine had I guess you'd call it a soft core porn magazine. And the cover story was FBI agent changes sex. And that simple event was a turning point because it told me, wow, it's possible to change sex. And I was obsessed with it from that point. And I knew about puberty. I hadn't started it yet at 13, but I might have done something if I knew what to do to prevent it. But I don't know, you trust your parents to take good care of you.
Mhm.
And if my parents would have sort of gone along with something that I felt was kind of crazy, I would have been scared and I would have had a sense of, well, what if this is the wrong decision? What if
Mm.
I'm wrong about this? What if I want to turn back?
Mhm.
I mean, it's a lie that the puberty blockers are 100% reversible. They're not.
Right.
And there's evidence of that. It's not just me saying it. You can look it up for yourself.
So,
And
are
there's
you saying?
the
I'm
risk.
sorry.
The risks are not worth it.
I'm sorry.
The risks are not worth it. The risks of the puberty blockers are not worth it because
Well,
you can't trust the diagnosis. You're dealing with children. Children have magical thinking and anybody going through puberty, especially girls. I think especially girls. I don't know. I didn't go through puberty as a girl, but it's a scary thing. Your body is going to change, and I certainly understand when people look at adults of their own birth sex not wanting to go there. I looked at men. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be my dad. I wanted to be my mom. So I understand that. But when you have that many kids claiming to be suffering from gender dysphoria, if that's even a term anymore, you have to question those diagnoses. There was a time when I advocated puberty blockers
mm,
because this was extremely rare, and I figured nobody would claim to have this problem unless they really had it.
mm,
But when you have a 4,000% increase in people claiming that they have this, it's not safe. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, and they've been made. And there's a lawsuit in England to the Tavistock Gender Clinic in this class action suit, and they're expecting 1,000 families. This does not tell me that detransitioning is a rare thing. which is what the activists will try to convince you of.
I want to dig into one particular thing that you said that was really interesting.
Okay.
Um, that because the way you made it sound and you describe your own experience, and then you compare that to the experience of kids today, is that as badly as you wanted to be a girl when you were a boy, um, that it was still on some level safer, even though you were suffering from gender dysphoria, and even though you would have loved to be offered a solution to that suffering, it still ultimately was safer for that to be something in the realm of fantasy that you could escape into, that you could daydream about, that you could think, my life would be better if. That was still safer for you than if the consequences of your adolescent decision making had been as heavy as what children are facing today. That, in other words, children today have the power to make decisions that will render them infertile as adults. And that's a lot of power. You and I would both agree that that's too much power for a child to have. And part of my philosophy as to why that should, I think, be obvious to any reasonable person is that we have no evidence that anybody knows at age 13 or 15 or 18 or even 25, frankly, um, whether or not they're going to want children at 28 or 30 or 40 as they're nearing the end of their window. And part of what I object to, by the way, about House Bill 2002 is that it actually, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I can't believe this is real, but if I'm reading the text of the bill correctly, it legalizes sterilization as young as 15. When we have no evidence that anyone is actually capable of making those decisions soundly and not regretting them, or that this is something that can be predicted. So I guess what I'm hearing you say that's so interesting is that as badly as you wanted to be a girl, as much as you were suffering with gender dysphoria as a boy, you still feel like it's better that you were able to sort of keep that a fantasy than that you as an adolescent should have been handed the power to actually make that decision and have the adults get on board with it and give you all that medical technology to make that a real thing. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, and it's a lot of it is just the fact that, and I'm probably abnormal in this, is, I had a very high IQ as a child,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I viewed it as an obsession and not, it's not a preference. People don't surgically alter their bodies over a preference. I mean, maybe, a nose job or something, but not something as drastic and permanent and disabling as gender surgery. But yeah, when I was 21, I went right for it. I didn't hesitate. I called psychiatrists. I looked up, we didn't have the internet in those days. I just went to the library and I found an article by a doctor who was, supposedly an expert on this. And
Wow,
I
so
got
this must have
started
been
down that road.
early 70s then.
Yeah, I would have been 74,
Okay.
early in 74.
So, um, what happened next?
Well, I told him I didn't have any money. He was a psychiatrist up at the University of Oregon Medical School who had written a number of articles. And I just thought it was fortuitous that he was in Portland where I lived. And so I called him and I told him tearfully that I felt like I was a transsexual, is what we called them in those days. And he said, well, you're certainly free to come see me. It's $50 an hour. And I said, well, I don't have any money. I was literally, starving rock band, We were eating apples and peanut butter, trying to make it as a band. And he said, well, if you'll participate in my research, I will see you. I said, okay. So first time I saw him, they gave me 8 hours of psychological tests and physical tests. And I saw him a few times. He insisted that I do what they call the real life test, which is to live in the role, which I did not want to do. But really, I just wanted the hormones. I wasn't looking for therapy. I knew what I wanted, and I just wanted them to give me the estrogens. In fact, I told him that one day. And he said, "So you think I should just skip all this therapy nonsense and give you the pills?" And I said, "Yep, that's what I think." Which he eventually did, and I started taking Premarin. They also prescribed a progesterone, synthetic progesterone. So it was that combination of Premarin and Provera, which is actually, I don't think they do that anymore. I don't think Provera is. I think it's kind of fallen out of favor.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's how I got started.
And then
And
what
even
happened?
at that, even with my level of obsession with this, I turned back twice in my adulthood. First time because I was so terrified of surgery that I thought, well, if I'm not going to go through with the surgery, then there's no reason for me to be doing this. So I quit for a while, and then I think I was 30, 33 or something, and I was looking at the same thing, because I have an absolute phobia of surgery. Even though I was an RN for a while, it's just
Hmm.
so I decided to turn back and just try to have a normal relationship with a woman, and which I did for a while. Got married twice actually, and both times my gender dysphoria ruined the relationship. And I eventually got four surgeries. I got facial surgery and genital surgery, and I actually had myself have an orchiectomy prior to that surgery, just because I somehow reasoned that if I didn't have my own testosterone, the estrogen would have more of an effect. So,
And what's it been like for you living with the results of those surgeries?
well, aside from the fact that I regret putting myself through all that trauma, because all surgery is trauma, and that's something that I don't think a lot of these kids will understand. And I
Absolutely.
think they're probably not even told, but surgery is trauma, period. I mean, it's
And
very clean trauma, but it's a trauma. Your body remembers that stuff. So I regret putting myself through all that trauma. I think my health has suffered in certain ways because of that. But the way I talk to my friends is I say, well, I don't regret living easily as a woman, which I have. I don't want my junk back, is what I tell people, which is kind of a funny way to put it, but it's true. I for decades I looked down at my body in the shower and I would put my hand over my crotch to see what it would look like without all that stuff hanging there, and that's what I wanted.
it
So I
sounds like
don't
you
regret
have
that.
very mixed feelings about it because you recognize that your body has been traumatized and that these medical procedures are not without consequence.
Well, and I also it's, I I hesitate to say this, but I gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder. I don't even know what it's called these days. Somebody told me that gender dysphoria is considered a slur now, which is just stupid. But it is absolutely a mental illness,
You
and
described it
sometimes
as, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sometimes I describe it as a spiritual travail, and I am not convinced that transition, especially surgical transition, I'm not convinced that that is the best or the only way to treat it. Just because we haven't come up with effective or lasting therapy doesn't mean that we can't.
Hmm.
And
We
there's so
were,
little evidence. There's so little long-term follow-up and so little evidence that this really solves any problems.
you mean you were
Especially if,
only 21. And I know at
yeah,
the time, I mean, at the time it felt like a lifetime to you because you had felt dysphoric about your sexed body since you were so little. So I can imagine feeling like, oh, I'm finally an adult now. I'm going to go get what I want. But looking back now at 70, you must think that you were such a baby at 21. And, the part of what strikes me as tragic is that we actually do have therapy that, my adversaries would call conversion therapy, but there's nothing abusive about it. If you look at the Wikipedia definition of conversion therapy, what we're talking about has nothing to do with that. What we're talking about is holistic and comprehensive psychotherapy that prioritizes the principle of first to no harm and providing minimally invasive care. I mean, it sounds like you didn't really have much counseling, and at the time you were sort of impulsive and you had your mindset on this is what I want to do. But you also described this sort of obsessive compulsive quality. And I think that's something that we're not talking about enough in the discourse about how we conceptualize and treat gender dysphoria, because there is a lot of overlap between gender dysphoria and obsessive compulsive disorder. And then sometimes there's also overlap between OCD and autism spectrum disorder, and all of those can commingle. But I've noticed that, anytime you sort of pay attention to the thought process of someone who is pursuing some kind of, social or medical transition, thinking that that will solve their problems, it very often, I would say more often than not, has this sort of obsessive compulsive quality to it, where it seems like there's this idea that they've latched onto that then like everything else just goes to reinforce that idea. And I'm very interested in neuroplasticity and behavioral psychology, um and to me it's not that hard to see how that could happen. That, when we have distress, we look for a way to conceptualize it, we look for a way to fix it, we look for someone or something to blame because we want to simplify our problems, because we want to feel that they're manageable, that we have control in some way. And I think I'm sort of rambling here, but I'm just sort of speculating about the what you described as the obsessive compulsive nature of how you were relating to your gender dysphoria. And I wonder, I mean, it doesn't sound like you had a lot of therapy, but did anybody ever sort of offer to help you with that, to offer to sort of look at how your mind had fixated on like, this is what's going to make me feel better, but maybe help you like create a little bit of breathing room around that to see how is this a way that I'm managing my emotions, and are there other ways that I can deal with the complexity of my human experience, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but and I had I had whatever amount of psychology training you get as an RN, but I would say this is definitely a variety of obsessive compulsive. And speaking of autism, my sister is also an RN, and we were talking a few years ago, and she said she was describing some of my behavior as a child, and she said she thought I was, and it wasn't diagnosed a lot in those days, but she thought that I was high functioning autistic.
Hmm.
It's because of my physical mannerisms,
Hmm.
echolalia.
Hmm.
I still have that actually. I will say something and then I'll continue to mouth it afterwards,
Hmm.
which is really bizarre. But
Hmm.
and the data is there with some of these current diagnoses of all the psychological comorbidities that are going on with this, that just to me should add to the questioning of it. It's just I just really don't understand the push to just dive right into medical treatment of these kids, because it's not reversible, and so many of them are going to regret it. And just, well, I sent you that thing I wrote about
Yeah.
the phrase that I really, really hate is life-saving affirmative care. It's just designed to shut down dialogue,
Yeah, I
because
agree.
nobody's going to argue with life-saving. Nobody's going to argue with affirmative. Nobody's going to argue with care. But it's just a lie. It really is. And these activists are telling people, parents, they're telling parents, they have cute little phrases like, do you want to, what is it? Do you want a
Dead daughter, alive son.
dead daughter or
Yeah.
live son, and it's just brutal psychological manipulation, and it's not true. There's no evidence for this. It's all based on the general statistic that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've read as much as I can find on this. It's all based on the general statistic that suicidality is higher among the gender dysphoric, right? I mean, there's no evidence that children who are not affirmed are going to commit suicide. I mean, the people are suicidal or they're not. I was never suicidal. No matter how depressed, no matter how upset, no matter how obsessed I got with this as a child and a teenager, the idea of killing myself didn't even occur to me. Well, that's something you'd hear online in a chat room or something and think, yeah, I'm going to say I'm suicidal because then I'll get the attention that I need.
Exactly. And I've done entire conversations debunking the suicide myth, and we could certainly spend a lot of time there. But could I share with you the some of the bill that I'm concerned about? Um,
Yeah,
so, and I don't know how it goes with the live stream. By the way, hello to anyone who's tuning in. This is my first time live streaming. I have no idea what I'm doing. Um, but I'm going through Riverside, and they do have a screen share feature. Um, and I wanted to I'm just looking at a couple of documents. So one is a memo that sort of summarizes the bill, and it is only 4 pages, and then the bill itself is 39 pages. So maybe I'll start with no, I want to start with the whole bill. All right, so share my screen.
who's sponsoring the bill?
That's a good question. Okay. So I'm sharing this with you. Sarah, can you see this?
Not really.
Oh,
And I
because
don't.
it's me. But can
I
you?
don't have my readers, so
Okay, but it's on your screen. You just can't read it because you're looking at your phone and it's tiny, right?
yeah, it's tiny, and like I say, I don't have my readers.
All right. I'm going to stop
So,
and kind of just look from my phone what it looks like if I press the button on Twitter. Because I just want to see what our audience is seeing on the screen right now.
okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you can see the whole. Okay. So people can see this. Let me see, make sure we're on the right place. Okay. So, I mean, there's so much that I'm horrified by in this bill, just with regard to like, no minimum age for a child receiving abortion without parental consent. Like that in itself just paves the way for child sex trafficking, which is extremely upsetting to me. But what section am I looking for? Sorry, hold on. Let me go over to my other. Eight. All right, so I think I'm looking for section 8, starting there. No, that's not what I'm looking for yet. Okay, here we go. Gender affirming treatment. This starts on page 10, section 19. All right, let me read out loud the parts that I want you to grasp here, Sarah.
Okay.
So there's some definitions, and then it says a carrier offering a health benefit plan in this state may not deny or limit coverage under the plan for gender affirming treatment that is medically necessary as determined by the physical or behavioral health care provider who prescribes the treatment and prescribed in accordance with accepted standards of care. Okay, so there's a problem just with that, right? Because I and many other concerned providers really disagree over the issue of whether this type of so-called treatment is actually medically necessary. So when it says medically necessary as determined by the physical or behavioral health care provider who prescribes the treatment, you have to bear in mind that there are many behavioral health care providers who will write people letters on the first visit because they believe that everyone who ever thinks that they should pursue any of these hormones or surgeries should have them without any so-called gatekeeping, right? So it's not as if all behavioral health care providers are on the same page as to what is actually medically necessary. We are a deeply divided community, and there are people like me who've done our research and come to much different conclusions based on our research and our clinical experience and our ethics. And then you have behavioral health care providers and physical health care providers who say, nope, I'm happy to write you a letter or write you a prescription on the first visit, no questions asked. You're trans if you say you are, and I don't want to be a gatekeeper. Okay, so that's my first comment on this section right here, which is page 10, line 42. Before I even move on to the next part, was there anything that you would want to say about that, Sarah?
Well, it's just, I mean, it sounds good, but it's suspicious because of exactly what you said. Not everyone agrees that this is medically necessary.
Right.
I don't agree, and I've been through it. I don't think it's medically necessary.
Okay. And then continuing, a carrier offering a health plan benefit in the state may not be apply categorical cosmetic or blanket exclusions to medically necessary gender affirming treatment. Again, medically necessary, what does that mean? Um, C, exclude as a cosmetic service a medically necessary procedure prescribed by a physical or behavioral healthcare provider as gender affirming treatment, including but not limited to tracheal shave, hair electrolysis, facial feminization surgery, or other facial gender affirming treatment, revisions to prior forms of gender affirming treatment, and any combination of gender affirming treatment procedures. So, what this clause is saying is that even though these are all cosmetic and not medically necessary from the perspective of a great many concerned providers, of which I am only one voice, um, this is saying health plans cannot call it what it is. They cannot say this is cosmetic, this is not medically necessary. They're saying this is required if someone wants it, which is not how I want my health plan dollars being spent. D, again, this is in a list of things that health plans cannot do. Issue an adverse benefit determination denying or limiting access to gender affirming treatment unless a physical or behavioral health care provider with experience prescribing or delivering gender affirming treatment has first reviewed and approved the denial of or the limitation on access to the treatment. I'm going to have to read that again to understand it. So let me go back here. A healthcare, okay, going back here. A carrier offering a health plan benefit in this state may not issue an adverse benefit determination denying or limiting access to gender affirming treatment unless a healthcare provider with experience prescribing or delivering gender affirming treatment has first reviewed and approved the denial of or the limitation on access to the treatment. So, okay, now that I've read it a second time, what this means is that health insurance cannot deny paying for these treatments unless someone who's already in the practice of recommending and providing these treatments says that someone shouldn't go through with it. In other words, a healthcare provider or a behavioral health provider who views themselves as someone who should not gatekeep, who views gender affirming care as a good thing, should be the one to decide when not to give it to people. But we all know that's not happening, right? Like if you ask any of these people, like if you go to any gender clinic, the anyone who's engaging in providing these treatments, or at least the vast majority of people, just think that they should be affirming everyone. So it's saying the only limitation is basically a situation that's very unlikely to happen, which is that someone who's otherwise gung-ho about providing these so-called treatments would express that that shouldn't be available to a particular person. Before I move on to the next section, and there's plenty more here, but Sarah, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was thinking about it as you read that what would make sense to me is anyone who is seeking those kind of procedures should have the opposite view involved. In other words, they should see somebody before you go that drastic with surgery. You should talk to somebody who's opposed to that treatment.
There's
Find out
so you're saying
why.
checks and balances, but they would call that conversion therapy, wouldn't they?
What is not conversion therapy?
Well,
It's
I
not
agree.
questioning somebody's beliefs is not conversion therapy. You know what conversion therapy is? Telling a child that they can be the opposite sex.
Absolutely.
It's conversion therapy to tell your to you have a feminine little boy. Okay, well that's conversion therapy, and
Absolutely.
it's a fact that if you put, even if it was true that the puberty blockers are reversible, which they're not, partially maybe, if it was true that they were reversible, the statistics show that it's like 80 or 90% of kids who are started on puberty blockers go on to the rest
Oh,
of the way
it's
down that
95,
road.
upwards of 95% of children prescribed puberty blockers go on to cross-sex hormones. And yet, 80 to 90%, it could be even higher than that, of children who experience gender dysphoria in childhood and aren't prescribed puberty blockers will experience resolution of that gender dysphoria.
Exactly.
So,
It's like the mirror image of one to the other. You've got, on the one hand, you've got the so-called affirming treatment with with the puberty blockers, and 80 to 90% of them go on to the whole route, the whole road of no return. Whereas if you just leave them alone, let them go through puberty, the same amount of people will just drop it. They'll just decide that was a childhood fantasy.
all right, I'm
It's
going to move
just,
on to the next section, if that's all right with you, Sarah.
well, yeah. Hey, it's your show.
Um, all right, so here we are on page 11, line 14. A carrier described in subsection 2, meaning what we just read, of this section must satisfy any network adequacy standards, contract with the network of gender affirming treatment providers. Basically, this is all about accessibility. Um, so they're saying basically you have to pay providers or get providers to provide these services so that they're widely available. So I'm going to kind of skip the details there. And then something about the Department of Consumer and Business Services conducting a targeted market conduct examination. Um, so I don't know what this is really about, but I'm going to skip past some of these details. And we're going to move on to section 24. This is near the bottom of page 11. Again, we're looking at Oregon House Bill 2002, which the reason we're doing this live stream for those who haven't heard this from the beginning is that there's a hearing for this bill on Monday, coming up in 2 days at 3 p.m. in Salem, or you can testify in Salem, you can testify remotely, you can submit your testimony online. And so we're going over this. Section 24. Gender affirming treatment means a procedure, service, drug, device, or product that a physical or behavioral healthcare provider prescribes to treat an individual for incongruence between the individual's gender identity and the individual's sex at birth. Notwithstanding blah, 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 medical assistance provided to a member of a coordinated care organization or a medical assistant recipient who is not enrolled in a coordinated care organization shall include gender affirming treatment. So basically, again, making sure that anyone with any health insurance gets this coverage. And then it says the Oregon Health Authority or a coordinated care organization may not A, deny or limit gender affirming treatment that is subsection A, medically necessary as determined by the physical or behavioral healthcare provider who prescribes the treatment, and B, prescribed in accordance with accepted standards of care. So again, we went over this already. This is sort of a duplicated language, but there is no consensus that so-called gender affirming care is safe, effective, or medically necessary. There's no consensus in the medical field or in the mental health field. This is widely contested, but the people who do recommend these services, they consider them medically necessary for everyone, and they will rubber stamp people through the systems. There's no safeguarding. They actively will express they do not believe in gatekeeping. Okay. So again, may not deny blah blah blah. Oh wait, I've already been over this stuff. This reads
No,
just
this is so far they've not specifically mentioned minors when they're talking about.
Oh yeah, let's get
Yeah.
there. I just feel like I already went over this because this whole list of because we just went over how may not deny as cosmetic service and medically necessary procedures. So basically, they're taking things like tracheal shave and hair electrolysis and saying, even though these are cosmetic, they may not be denied by claims as merely cosmetic. Okay, I already went over all this. I don't know if I just accidentally backtracked. I'm sorry for repeating myself. Um, and then a coordinated care organization must do all this availability, accessibility things. So basically, here's some more jargon, some more legalese about making sure that benefit plans offer these services. Uh, yeah, so there's nothing about age in that section, but then let's go over the protections for providers and individual. So this is page 14 now. We're on section 31 of House Bill 2002, which again, if you're just joining us, they're voting on, or I don't know if they're voting Monday, but there's a hearing on this Monday, and I really want to encourage people to testify or submit written testimony online. So here it says, an insurer that provides malpractice insurance for a healthcare provider may not take any adverse action, including but not limited to sanctions, fines, penalties, rate increases, or denial or revocation of coverage against a healthcare provider authorized to provide care in this state if the adverse action is 1, based solely on the healthcare provider providing, authorizing, recommending, aiding, assisting, referring for, or otherwise participating in a reproductive or gender affirming healthcare service that is lawful in this state, but a violation of the laws of another state in which the healthcare provider is authorized to provide care. Or actually, I'm going to stop and explain. So basically, to break down what this is saying, is that malpractice insurance has to be supportive and not adversarial toward any healthcare provider that provides gender affirming care, which they're lumping together with reproductive care. So let's say a healthcare provider is licensed both in Oregon and Florida, and obviously Oregon and Florida are in very different places right now with regard to the laws around these types of medical services. So they're saying even if the provider is licensed in both states, and they're providing care, and interpret this to mean that they're providing this so-called gender affirming care in Oregon, that they can't be sanctioned or punished in any way for providing care here that's illegal there. But let me move on to the next section. Or two, a result of an adverse action taken against the healthcare provider's license issued by another state that resulted solely from the healthcare provider providing, authorizing, recommending, aiding, assisting, referring for, or otherwise participating in a reproductive or gender affirming healthcare service that is lawful in this state, but a violation of the laws of the other state that prohibit the provision of reproductive or gender affirming care service, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot more. There's a lot more here that really provides protections for doctors and behavioral healthcare providers that are engaged in gender affirming care. And I haven't read it all, so bear with me. Like, I appreciate the patience of you, my guest, Sarah, as well as anyone who's following along here as I'm just sort of catching up and trying to interpret what this means. So in section 32, it's proposing an amendment to ORS 677.190 that authorizes the Oregon Medical Board to refuse to grant a license or suspend or revoke a license for what they call unprofessional or dishonorable conduct. You know, oh, you know what? Sorry. So the stuff that's not in bold or italics is actually the original law. The bold is the stuff that's proposed to be added. And if it's in italics and brackets, that is proposed to be removed. So again, here's more protections for people who provide services. And then here, page 15, line 44 through top of page 16, it's saying, let's say someone was sanctioned in another state for providing so-called gender affirming care. The board may not punish them for that here. So, I mean, so in states that are outlawing, I mean, I think one of the practical implications of this is that states that are outlawing gender affirming care for minors, for example, doctors or therapists in those states who are punished in those states can sort of, this is sort of like a sanctuary state for them.
Right. Yeah, a friend of mine said that was, this might be the bill that she was referring to. She just said there was a bill that was proposing to make Oregon a sanctuary state like California for so-called gender affirming care.
Oh, wow. And then here, this is page 17 now, starting with line 17. We're in section 33. I'm not reading the section before it, but it says, this section does not apply to a licensee who is an adult in custody in a penal institution if the sole reason for incarceration is the licensee's performance of or assistance in the performance of a reproductive or gender affirming healthcare service that is otherwise lawful in this state. And so on. So basically saying like they know that like there are states where people are going to go to jail for this stuff. And so they're writing in laws to protect people who go to jail because of something they did in Florida, to protect those people here in Oregon. Same again here, like Oregon State Board of Nursing, here we are in section 35, may not suspend, revoke, or refuse to grant a license to practice because of a person's conviction resulting solely from the provision of reproductive or gender affirming healthcare service. So basically, like, Oregon is a sanctuary for all the people who are all the Dr. Gallaghers of the world who are being prosecuted right now.
Yeah, that doesn't go along with my
and it's just more
desire to see Oregon become one of the states that doesn't allow gender surgery on minors.
And the whole next several pages, for anyone who wants to read this in depth, 18, 19, 20, like it seems like there's just more and more clauses like that being added to existing legislation in this proposed bill to just protect doctors in one way after another. Um, Now I'm seeing a lot of plain text that's neither bold nor italicized, so that means we're looking at existing legislation, and then again, the bold sections are the parts that are being added, and the italicized sections are the parts they're proposing to take away. Um, so I really wanted to find, okay, and then section 45. Um, this part is all about criminalizing any interference with the provision of these services. So I would include people, or I would encourage people to read this for themselves, because if you try to interfere in any way with any type of so-called gender affirming care or provision of abortion or birth control to a very young child, I mean, that's the other stuff in this bill that, like, sorry, I'm so disorganized. I did not go into this even ready. I just just doing what I can. I'm going back to the beginning now. Sarah, while I'm looking for the next thing that I want to bring to our audience's attention, please feel free to speak whatever thoughts this has brought up for you.
Well, mostly I'm thinking why laws have to be so complex. It just seems like you should be able to state what the law is in a few pages. But, I hear about laws from the national senators and congresspeople that, they will say things like the bill had 1,000 pages. I don't even understand how you could have 1,000 pages
Hmm.
on a bill, but
Well, I've been studying this stuff more lately, and I totally hear you, but that's why I'm sort of sharing that, you know, like for example, here, and right now I'm on page 3, line 21, section 7. It says ORS 435.225 is amended to read, right? So basically, this section of this bill is proposing an amendment to another law, right? And then it shows, like, the italicized part shows what they're proposing to remove, the bold part shows what they're proposing to add, and then the plain text part shows what the existing law already says. So it, you know, there's a lot of legalese. But I'm scanning for the part that I really wanted to bring people's attention to. Um, okay, so here in section 8, it's like they have to specify this and you wonder where they're going. So section 8, ORS 109.640, as amended by section 14, chapter 349, Oregon Laws 2021, is amended to read, 1A, as used in this subsection, reproductive health care has the meaning given that term in section 2 of this 2023 act, except that reproductive health care does not include the voluntary sterilization of a minor under 15 years of age. Here's why I want to bring your attention to this point. Why are we even remotely talking about voluntary sterilization of minors under 15 years of age? Yes, they're saying that's off limits, but like, I heard recently someone quoted Brett Weinstein. I guess he said, "Why are we in this section of the bookstore?" Like, how did we get remotely in the ballpark of talking about having to say that you can't sterilize minors under 15 years of age? Yes, it's good to say that you can't sterilize minors under 15, but why are we going there? Well, if you keep reading this section, you discover that that's the only thing that's off limits. That is the only thing here that's off limits. Okay, um, so section B adds to the existing language that pharmacists are added to the lists of physicians, nurse practitioners, and so on who can provide reproductive health care information and services, as it says, to any person without regard to the age of the person. So it's adding to the list that pharmacists can provide reproductive health care to minors. Okay. And then the existing law, because this is, remember, this is not bold or italic. So the existing law says that a minor 15 years of age or older may give consent without the consent of a parent or guardian of the minor to all of these treatments, including oh, hold on, it says except as provided by ORS. I know I gotta look that up. Hmm. I'm getting lost. I hope I'm not losing people with how complicated this is getting. I'm just going to skip past this part. Oh, this is the part that now we're getting to section 9. I read this part so many times and I sent a screenshot to my state representative. Like, am I crazy or do these two statements directly contradict each other? And he said he was just as confused as I was, and he's used to reading legalese. So let me just go over this. Section 9, ORS 109.650 is amended to read 1. Except as provided in ORS 192.567, a physician, physician assistant, nurse practitioner, pharmacist, or naturopathic physician providing reproductive health care information and services to a minor as described in ORS 109.640, 1. May not disclose to the minor's parent or legal guardian information regarding the information and services provided to the minor unless the minor has authorized the disclosure in writing. Okay, so first it's saying to amend the existing laws to say that any medical professional providing reproductive health care information and services, which, by the way, again, we have to remember includes abortion, medication abortion, Plan B, birth control, and all of that, as well as treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, that the minor has to authorize the medical professional to share that information with their parents. The physician or nurse practitioner, whoever, cannot talk to a minor's parents about those services or information being provided. But then the next section appears to directly contradict that. So section 2 says a hospital or a physician, physician assistant, nurse practitioner, naturopathic physician, dentist, or optometrist providing care, diagnosis, or treatment to a minor, as described in ORS 109.640, may advise the minor's parent or legal guardian of the care, diagnosis, or treatment provided to the minor or the need for any treatment of the minor without the consent of the minor, and is not liable for advising the parent or legal guardian without the consent of the minor. So it seems like on the one hand, it's saying that these professionals may not disclose this information to parents or legal guardians, and then the very next session says they may disclose this information. So I have no idea what's going on here.
It sounds like a direct contradiction, but I
Right,
don't
it
know.
sounds that way to you too, right?
Yeah.
um, but there's, okay, let me see. So now this part's really crazy. Now we're on, let's see, we're on page 5, section 11. Section 11 says ORS 436.225 is amended to read, and I'm noticing all of this is in plain text. It's not in bold. So that this is what the original text is. And so there's already some legislation around this. I don't get it, but it says like, I mean, this part is just crazy. Starting on line 18, section 3. Whenever any physician, physician assistant, or nurse practitioner has reason to believe an individual 15 years of age or older is unable to give informed consent, no sterilization shall be performed until it is determined by a circuit court that the individual involved is able to and has given informed consent. Whenever the court determines under the provisions of this chapter that a person lacks the ability to give informed consent, the court shall permit sterilization only if the person is 18 years of age or older and only upon showing that such operation, treatment, or procedure is in the best interest of the individual. Notwithstanding section 3, blah, 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 informed consent may not be obtained while the individual to be sterilized is in labor or childbirth, seeking to obtain or obtaining an abortion, or under the influence of alcohol or other substances that affect the individual's state of awareness. So this is saying that unless you're pregnant, getting an abortion, drunk, or have been like declared by the state to be unable to make decisions for yourself, then sterilization is available to people age 15 and over. And this is supposedly in the existing legislation. So now I have to look up ORS 436.225 because this is what they're proposing to amend. And so I'm looking on a different website. I just Googled ORS 436.225, which anybody can Google. And yes, the existing law allows for sterilization of minors. What the actual fuck? This is a situation where swearing is appropriate. Sarah, did you know this? That it's legal to sterilize minors? I mean, we all know that so-called gender-affirming care does that, right? It's just not with the, like, that's, the so-called gender-affirming care is sort of provided where sterilization is not the express goal. It is the side effect that's supposedly worth it for the sake of the person's well-being, because don't you know they're going to kill themselves and this is the best alternative, and so what if they're sterile? Like, that's what we're told, and that itself is bad enough and a big enough lie with a high enough regret rate as it is. But here they're just being out in the open with it. Like, the law addresses sterilization directly. And what I'm learning through this process is that we already have laws that basically provide provisions for in what cases it's okay or not okay. And the, you know, what's off limits is pretty restricted here. But otherwise, it's okay to sterilize people starting at the age of 15 without parental consent. And they're just, it's like they're saying the quiet part out loud. That's what I'm getting here, is that, like, because all this so-called gender affirming care, like, they've been trying to sweep it under the rug that this is sterilizing, or they've been saying, well, yes, that just happens to be a side effect. But here it's like, no, they're just out in the open talking about sterilizing people.
Well, it sounds like they're just trying to kind of covertly preventing the action from being taken against someone for the side effect of sterilization of gender affirming therapies.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder who's behind this, who stands to benefit, because everything I see in this document, whether it's about reproductive health care or so-called gender affirming care, seems to benefit either big pharma, big fertility, or child sex trafficking.
There was a clinic in, I believe it was in Nashville, Tennessee, that was shut down because a video was made public of, I guess it was a meeting conducted by a couple of different executives talking about all the money they were going to be making with their gender affirming for minors clinic there. They were talking about how much money they were going to make from the surgery and from the ongoing medical follow-up care and from the, from the prescriptions, of course. And it's, it's hard to hard to comprehend the idea that this push to transition children was all based on money for pharmaceuticals and surgical outfits, but it kind of looks that way sometimes
It's like this
because
is no different.
you have to wonder what the motivation is. Why is this being pushed so hard? It's almost like you could almost get into a conspiracy theory like this is the Chinese are doing this to us to destroy the country.
Oh, I'm definitely, secretly on that, conspiracy theory train of thinking. Like if you look at how so much of this is being perpetuated over TikTok and TikTok comes from China and TikTok is not legal in China. They have this educational app available that's like TikTok, but that's, where you can, minors can only use it for 40 minutes a day and they learn science. Like,
Yeah.
and meanwhile, they're just feeding us crack to our brains in the
Well,
form
I'm
of.
not a conspiracy theorist, but I learned a long time ago that if something just does not make sense, if something is happening that just makes no sense at all, the question you ask is cui bono, who benefits?
Yeah, follow the money.
Follow the
Okay,
money or follow the benefit? If it's not money, what is it? If is it ideology? Is it an ideological thing?
I just
You know
found
that
something else that I wanted to point out.
okay.
So now I'm at the bottom of page 5 for anyone who's following along. Again, this is Oregon House Bill 2002 that we're looking at, and um, you need to submit testimony now or register to testify for Monday. You can testify remotely. So, bottom of page 5, starting with line 44. A health plan benefit offered in this state must provide coverage for all of the following services, drugs, devices, products, and procedures. And then there's a long list of things like well woman care and counseling for sexually transmitted diseases. And then you kind of go through all this. You're like, yeah, makes sense. Health plans should cover STD treatments and pregnancy and urinary tract infections. Okay, got it, right? And then you keep going. And then in the list, there's abortion. Okay, so healthcare plans must pay for abortion here. Okay, and then keep scrolling. Now we're at the top of page 7. Here it is, voluntary sterilization. So this is line 3, page 7. Voluntary sterilization. Healthcare plans must pay for this. And again, there's no lower age limit besides 15. The age limit is 15. And if you want to be sterilized starting at 16, they're saying the quiet part out loud, whether you call it gender affirming care or whether you call it reproductive health care. Yeah, healthcare plans have to pay for voluntary sterilization. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't cases where a vasectomy or tubal ligation or hysterectomy is maybe the right choice for that individual and that family. But there's going to be a lot of regret coming from this.
Yeah, well, it's just hard to believe that it's that important for non-adults to make that decision.
Oh, and then here it is, page 7, line 18. A health benefit plan may not impose on an enrollee a deductible, coinsurance, copayment, or any other cost-sharing requirement on the coverage required by this section. A healthcare provider shall be reimbursed for providing the services described in this section without any deduction for coinsurance, copayments, or any other cost-sharing amounts. Okay, so translation, no deductible, no copay, no coinsurance, free. This is all free. You may not be charged. If you have health insurance in Oregon, you don't have to pay a dime. And if you don't have health insurance, get on OHP and it'll be free there. You can be sterilized starting at the age of 15 and you don't have to pay a dime. I have a real problem with this just from a behavioral economic standpoint that, like the cheaper something is, the less seriously you take it, the less you have to think about it. Like, I was recently watching some videos by world-class negotiation expert Chris Voss on the art of negotiation. He's really great. He's worked with hostage situations. And I recently recommended him to someone who needed help with assertiveness training. Um, for learning to stand up for themselves. And so I was like rewatching some Chris Voss just to refresh myself. And I remember him saying, if it's free, take three, right? Like there's just kind of this impulse of like free stuff, sure, I'll take it. Um, but this is and also if you think about like the psychological factor of people being afraid that they'll lose access to this. Like, let's say that we elect a Republican president in the next election. There are going to be people who rush to get these services because they're afraid that the laws will be reversed. That happened already with people jumping in to so-called gender affirming care when it was looking like Trump was being elected. I remember Helena Kirshner talking about that. I'm not sure if she talked about it directly with me. She was on episode 8 of my podcast, and anyone can go and listen to that. But there was this mentality that a lot of formerly trans-identified people, desisters and detransitioners reported that was like around 2015, 2016, where like Trump's going to take away our trans-affirming healthcare, so we better all get all the hormones and surgeries we can now. Right. So I think this idea that it's free kind of creates this like, it's free, better go get it while you can, and it just increases the rate of regret, and it doesn't force people to think seriously about major life decisions, which like why shouldn't you have to think seriously? And that's why I was posting on Twitter today things that nobody liked. Well, no, lots of people appreciated my opinions, but people on both sides of the political aisle strongly objected, because my position is actually very moderate on abortion. It's, do I believe abortion should be legal? Yes. Do I think it should be free for everyone and treated like no big deal? No, it's a trauma. And why shouldn't it cost money? Why shouldn't you have to think seriously about a major life decision? Why shouldn't that gravity be reflected in the economics of the situation? That's my personal stance on that. Sarah, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm not. That's not an issue that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I've never dealt with a pregnancy either in my two marriages or obviously myself because I can't get pregnant. My feelings on abortion in general is I think that there is a point, the objections to abortion, the right to life people, it's kind of all based on magical thinking as far as I'm concerned, into thinking that, a zygote is a human being. So I kind of object to abortion once the fetus has a nervous system and is experiencing something. But prior to that, it just doesn't make any sense to me for it to be illegal. But that's pretty much the extent of my opinion on it.
Well, you're with me where you're somewhere in the middle where you believe that women should have access to abortion, but that doesn't mean that it's something to be cavalier with. And that's my point. And I think how we relate to the finances is something does suggest something of the public attitude towards it. And I think that when you make abortion free, you are demonstrating their attitude about it and encouraging people to think as if it's no big deal. And it is a big deal. It's a major life decision. It's at least a physical trauma, if not an emotional and spiritual trauma. And
Well,
then,
taking it lightly is also encouraging, especially young people, to maybe be a little less cautious about having sex if they think, well,
right,
worst comes to worst, I can always just get an abortion.
right. And it'll be free rather
Right,
than at least, I mean, the deterrent of there being a cost is like, yeah, be a little bit more careful if for no other reason than you don't exactly feel like a random $1,000 cost coming up right now. Like,
right.
Um, so on page 8, there's this beginning of the reproductive health services section, and this basically just says that all public institutions of higher education must provide these services. Um, and I think this has to do with, well, I actually don't know because I haven't read this carefully enough yet to see if this is just about contraception and abortion, or if this also has to do with so-called gender affirming care. I would not be surprised if there are already laws insisting that all public colleges have to offer so-called gender affirming care, because that's what it seems like is going on in places like Oregon and California, but I actually don't know. But this part seems to just be about abortion and birth control. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay, here we have another section on gender affirming treatment. Oh no, is this what yeah, this is what I already read out loud and repeated myself on. So I think I've gone through most of the stuff I wanted to go through. I still actually need to submit my own testimony, but I've just been trying to raise awareness along the way. Yeah, so we went through the section on protections for providers, malpractice and stuff, and basically how this all just sets it up. Like, I'm going to stop screen sharing now. So yeah, I mean, in sum, I think what this bill does is basically remove as many barriers as possible for both all manner of reproductive health services, including abortion, and make so-called gender affirming care widely available, force insurance companies to pay for it, even if it's cosmetic. Continue to perpetuate the lie that this treatment is safe, effective, medically necessary, and that there's any consensus on that, and revokes parental rights. And, you know, even aside from all the gender stuff, just looking at the reproductive health stuff, my major concern is, like, what are these lawmakers, when they're writing this, what do they think is going to happen? Who do they think this is for with regard to the laws about minors and abortions, or minors and contraceptives? Do they think that there are all these very mature minors in loving relationships that are secure, and they know themselves and they know their partner, they just really want to have some beautiful, sweet lovemaking, but their parents are horrible and would disown them and punish them and beat them if they found out. And so these laws just make it easy for these mature children in love to have sex without getting in trouble. Is that what they think they're doing? Because to me, what it looks like in practice is this is, you know, covering up what happens when children are sexually abused. They're saying even below the age of 15. Now, I personally don't think that anybody below the age of 15 is capable of consenting to sex, but they're saying that, you know, an 11-year-old could get an abortion, and a healthcare provider would be obligated to provide that and not tell their parents. And it's like, that's a huge red flag for so much abuse going unchecked. You know, who stands to benefit from that? It's not the 11-year-old. It's whatever older people are in that kid's life that don't want their parents to know that she's pregnant. So it's hard for me to even just focus on the gender piece right now, because the stuff around abortion, as a pro-choice person, I'm so offended by it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of anti-parent stuff going on, and I suppose you could argue that it's to protect children against abusive parents, but I don't think most parents are abusive. You can't base a law on the lowest common denominator.
Absolutely.
So
There's such a myth going on right now about parental abuse.
well, and it's not parental abuse to prevent your child from changing their sex, as far as I'm concerned. And that's
Yeah.
There are states where I don't even know what it is in Oregon, but in fact, I saw there was an article where a doctor had come out against a parent whose child got a tattoo. So somewhere on the East Coast, the 10-year-old had gotten a tattoo without the mother even knowing, but the mother was punished legally for the child getting a tattoo. The doctor that testified against the mother was in favor of child medical transition. So it's not okay for your kid to get a tattoo on his own consent, but he can change his sex or she can change her sex. I just don't understand the level of insanity on this whole topic. I don't care what an adult does. I sometimes think that adults should be moved to 25 instead of 21. But as far as I'm concerned, if an adult wants to carve up their body, as long as they've been at least minimally diagnosed with, psychologically diagnosed, so that it's not some kind of other mental illness that's driving them to think that they need to change their sex. But it's
Well,
it's just it's just the children. I can't deal with this push, and I don't understand the push unless it's just sort of some sort of LGBTQ plus belief that there's safety in numbers. So the more trans people we make, the better off we're all going to be.
mm,
When there's just, again, who benefits? The children don't benefit.
mhm.
There's just too much, and I don't understand why almost all of Europe, if they haven't outlawed it completely, has at least restricted severely the gender transition of minors. Australia has, France has, Hungary has recently, but it's almost like here in the United States, we pretend that that's not happening. We may acknowledge that it's happening, but we don't seem to care why, and the why obviously is that there's some really tragic outcomes. A lot of them. There's enough tragic outcomes that a country like Sweden can make it illegal.
So I have a question for you about the financial piece because, and so for those who weren't here from the beginning of the conversation, Sarah is 70 and a person of trans experience. You say that you were 21 years old, and by the time that you were 21 and you went to that professional, had you had felt since you were a very little boy like you wanted to be a girl. And you said earlier in our conversation, for those who weren't here for that, that even as bad as your gender dysphoria was when you were a teenager, you still are glad that puberty blockers weren't available, and it would have been crazy making for you if your parents had actually been on board with medicalizing you at that time. But at the ripe old age of 21, you went to someone who prescribed these regimens, and you didn't have any money. And they said, okay, well, if you agree to be part of my study, then I can provide this service. So for you, you have personal experience with how financial barriers and the lack thereof impacted you, just like I've reflected on how it impacted my choice when I was 24 to have an abortion, the fact that I could go to Planned Parenthood and get it for $50 as opposed to $500 or $5,000. So, with the life experience that you've had now, given that for you, money was an obstacle, but then it wasn't anymore because there was this other path whereby your service was covered. Now we're facing this proposed legislation in Oregon that would basically make so-called gender affirming care widely available at very little cost to the consumer, because as we went over in that one section of the bill, um, it says that health plans must pay for these so-called treatments and cannot disregard them as cosmetic. So what are your thoughts on sort of financial incentives and disincentives, financial barriers and boundaries? Um, should people have to think hard and save up money for a long time? What happens when we reduce the barriers? Does it make it easier for people to act on impulse? And anything you want to say from your own personal experience with that?
Well, like I said before, my main concern is children who are not capable of consent, regardless of whether it's covered by insurance or not. It's just the whole idea is insane to me. Um, but I also said earlier that I'm not convinced that even for adults that the transition is the only or the best way to treat it, because really there's no long-term evidence that any problems are solved. Wasn't there a recent Dutch study, I don't know how recent, that did a longer term study and discovered that there was an increase in suicidality among adults who had fully transitioned,
Mhm.
but it didn't really show up until 7 to 10 years later.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and the overall increase was over 19 times higher. And it really makes sense if I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out because it's like when it comes to trans stuff, people just get into this magical state of thinking, and it's like all the rules of normal human behavior just go out the window. It's like we think there's this magical type of human that doesn't proceed along the same developmental pathways as everyone else. But really, what we know about just human beings in general applies here, and that includes when it comes to suicide. And this is where I talk about the risk factors and the protective factors. Of course, people are going to be at increased risk of suicide when you take away their fertility, right? Because that can be hard for a lot of people to face. We know that responsibility to loved ones is a huge protective factor against suicide. I've talked to people who, we're seriously thinking about suicide, but their responsibility to the loved ones was a major reason not to, a major reason to come and talk to me instead and try to get some help. Um, so we're taking away the protective factor of responsibility to loved ones by robbing people of their fertility. We're inducing chronic pain and illness through these medical procedures that have high rates of complications. We know that women who've been on testosterone experience a lot of joint pain and vaginal atrophy. We know people experience surgical scar pain and numbness. We're taking away people's health and vitality and ability to experience sexual pleasure and connection, inducing numbness and pain in their genitals. I mean, the list just goes on. And then if you look at the impact of hormones and puberty blockers on bones, um, creating brittle bones makes it harder to get out and be active and exercise and do things you love and be sociable. So, I mean, the list just goes on. It's like, of course, in aggregate, in the long term, people who are suffering with regret and who are dealing with these complications are going to be at high risk of suicide. We know that, natural desistance rates of 80 to 90%, and that's from data from a few years ago before it became as much of a social contagion as it is now. Now the natural desistance rate, if we just left the kids alone, would be even higher because there are kids who have kids who have gender dysphoria only because of the social contagion element. In other words, it's people who had gender dysphoria that was more like your gender dysphoria, where the desistance rate would be 80 to 90%, and you would be considered an outlier. You'd be considered part of that 10 to 20% of people who had gender dysphoria as a child and it persisted into adulthood, right? But most people who had it as a child in your era would naturally desist. But if you take the children who are growing up in this era, of course, like it's socially influenced, so the desistance rates are going to be higher, and therefore the regret rates are going to be higher. Um,
Well, one clue to this is the fact that there are groups of friends, girls, in school who are all trans together. I mean, what are the odds of that?
right.
That's a major red flag that this is a social thing and it's not a psychological or medical thing. I mean, it's psychological in the sense that puberty is rough, but it's just, if I had a kid right now, they would not be going to public school and they would not have a smartphone, at least not one that was internet capable, because so-called social media is responsible for a lot of this. And there are people online in various gender little cliques online, Tumblr and Twitter and Facebook, who are happy to persuade these girls that all their problems of puberty are because they're trans. And it's a lie, and it's just destroying lives. And it's just, I think there's a lot of denial about the numbers. There's an online, people keep telling me I should call it, but I haven't. But there's a YouTube show called the Trans slash Atlantic Calling Show, and it's generally two transgendered hosts that take calls from people, and they get a lot of advice from calls from people needing advice, but they also get some hostile calls too, which they tend to deal with to a degree. But it's just listening to them talk. There is just so much. I know that they're sincere, but they're just wrong about so much. They believe that detransitioning is very, very rare. They believe that detransitioning is caused by social pressure. Well, no, how about the fact that you've destroyed somebody's health? So it's just, I do want to call that show, but I'm going to be nervous because they're not going to like what I have to say. I'm not too
Well,
nervous today because I think we're mostly in agreement on things.
on the subject of what you have to say, is there anything else that you would like to add, either for any of our legislators who might decide to tune into this, or to anyone in Oregon who's considering submitting testimony on this bill, or any other points you'd like to make for any other reason before we wrap up?
Just that I think we need to work on debunking, I hate that word, but debunking the idea consensus is that it's okay to transition children. Because I don't believe that's the case. I believe what's really happening is the opposing views are being shut down. You know, it's so easy to do. You just call them a transphobe. They're transphobic. That's why they're against it. I'm not transphobic. And I'm 100% against it for children. I want to make that clear. I mean, like I said before, I don't care what an adult does. It's up to them to modify their body if that's what they feel like they really need to do. I think in all cases, adult and children, I think it's obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a
Hmm.
very specific type
Yeah.
related to genitalia. And
Yeah.
well, it's not all, I shouldn't say it's all genitalia. It's also just, a lot of, when I was a child, the difference between men and women was completely superficial. Men looked a certain way, women looked a certain way. They had certain roles to play in society, and I didn't connect it with my body for a long time. And I think that that's kind of the way a lot of grown adults are looking at it now.
So
That
would you say that part of your gender dysphoria as a child was that you wanted to play the role that you saw being available for girls and women, as opposed to playing the role that you saw for boys and men?
Yeah, I remember as a very young child thinking that girls were better than boys. I wanted to be on the girls' team, not the boys' team. They just seemed smarter and calmer.
Hmm.
They seemed more like me, but I was
Hmm.
also very shy, so I didn't really have many friends of either sex.
Hmm.
I had a girlfriend for a while, and when I was in third grade, a girl who was a friend, and one day we were outside at recess playing, and we traded coats. So I was wearing a girl's coat. I didn't even think anything about it at the time. We just traded coats because we were friends. And some bigger kid came and beat me up because I was wearing a girl's coat. So that was probably a education for me.
Hmm.
Oh, people don't like this. Okay.
So it sounds like you were sort of a sensitive, quiet, meek little boy, and part of your desire to be seen and treated as a girl was that felt more suitable for your nature. Like you could just be quiet, calm, complacent, kind, agreeable, like
And
that.
all the adults that I liked the most in my life were women. I wanted to be like them. I didn't. I mean, I loved my dad and my grandpa, but I didn't feel like I was in their camp, and I didn't want to be like them. You know, the idea of growing up to be one of those guys was just horrifying to me, even as a young child.
What did
So
you what do you think you needed as a child that maybe got overlooked or that you didn't have the words to ask for at the time?
I don't know. My childhood was great. I had
Hmm.
great parents. I got everything I wanted. I was literally spoiled. My mother had 4 miscarriages before she had me, so I was like,
Hmm.
it's the RH negative problem, and so I was kind of like the miracle child.
Hmm.
Plus, I started reading when I was about 3, so I was an exceptional child. So my dad carried me around on his shoulders and showed me off to people.
So you had a good childhood, but yet you also felt really uncomfortable with the expectation that you would have to grow up and be a man.
Yeah, but it was all secret.
Hmm.
None of my friends knew about it. My sister might have figured it out.
Hmm.
I used to put Barbie's clothes on Ken when we
Did you
played.
did you feel like your family accepted you as being sort of the sensitive, quiet little boy that you were?
Well, I don't know. I felt accepted and loved regardless.
Mm.
I mean, they didn't even make me go to school. If I wanted to stay home from school, I stayed home from school.
Ah, you were spoiled.
I was totally spoiled. And they didn't worry about it because, I passed all the grades. I could pass the test without going to all the classes. But I was kind of, I wouldn't say antisocial, but I didn't really like other kids. They were too unpredictable. I preferred hanging around with adults. But as far as the gender thing, it was, like I said, until I was 13 and got the idea that you really could change your sex, it didn't really become, well, it was always kind of an obsession because it was always there, but it didn't really become a problem for me until I saw puberty approaching.
Mm.
So that's why people ask me, well, wouldn't you like to have stopped your puberty? And in hindsight, maybe, yeah, I don't know. But I don't think it would have been a good idea. I mean, like I said, even though I was so thoroughly gender dysphoric and immediately went for it as soon as I was 21, I still turned back twice. You still have doubts. So I don't recommend it. I don't really recommend it for anybody, but
Mm.
it should not be, we should not be doing it to children. I view it as child abuse. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah, me too. So you got a hold of me by email. So for anyone who's interested in talking to you, are you on any social media platforms? Do you have a website or anything? And do you want to hear from people?
Well, that's a bit of a sticky wicket because I've already been attacked online. In 2017, I'm still in a group as far as I know. I don't go there anymore, but there's a Facebook group I think it's called Transgendered Professionals or something like that. And I heard that there was this childhood transition going on a few years ago. And I put I thought a very mild post on that saying, are we sure this is a good idea? This does not seem right to me. And I'm not trusting the numbers of people that are complaining of this. I think it's some kind of social contagion. And rather than start a discussion, I just was immediately attacked. I was told I was a terrible person, that I was a self-hating transgender person, that I was a transphobe and I was a TERF. And it wasn't worth it.
So sounds like that's a no. You don't want to be found on social media.
Not really.
Okay, that's fine. So you'll just be known as Sarah for this episode, and I mean your face is here, but you don't have to identify anything beyond that. But I will put in a plug. So for anyone who is listening or who has made it this far, if you have been following my work but you haven't heard this yet, I will let you know. I am now on Locals. at somekindofTherapist.locals.com. That is where to find me. Yes, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at sometherapist. Yes, please listen to my podcast on YouTube or on any platform. This is a spur of the moment live stream that will only be on YouTube, so I do definitely recommend following me on YouTube, even if you normally listen to my podcast. Most of my stuff, though, is in podcast form on any platform. However, I have happy news with a bit of a downside to it. The happy news is that I've been very successful in my public works this past year. I have, um, we've gotten 40,000 audio downloads. I'm getting like 8,000 YouTube views a month now. My podcast is in the top 2.5%, and I love the success. And I love the attention and the praise and the support, but the pace at which I am receiving an influx of emails and DMs, and even people like trying to find other ways to reach me too, um, has far exceeded my bandwidth. So, my message for any listeners who have made it this far, who are tuning in, is that I am so sorry. I cannot keep up with all your messages, but I have a solution. It is my locals community. It's at somekindofTherapist.locals.com, and that's where to go if you want my attention, because I have to have some kind of boundaries. So for only $8 a month, you get to be part of a private community with no ads, no bullies, no trolls, meet like-minded people, ask questions, and I will respond to questions in live stream. So if you want your own personal live stream video, members only, with me responding to your personal questions, please join my locals community and support my work there at somekindofTherapist.locals.com. Thank you, Sarah, for bearing with me while I had to put in a plug for my new platform, because I'm really trying to direct everyone there. Please do not email me. Please do not DM me. You want to get a hold of me, go to locals. That's the way. And you can get your first month free with promo code grandfather. So that's what I wanted to say. Now, our other main take home messages for anyone who is actually watching this is we did this for a reason. We did an urgent last minute live stream for a reason, because House Bill 2002 is being voted on, or I don't know what day it's being voted on, but it is being heard at a hearing on Monday, March 20th at 3 p.m. Pacific time in Salem, Oregon. If you can testify in person, go online and register to testify. If you have expert witness testimony in opposition, contact your representative, Ed Deal, and let him know that you want to be an expert witness. If you can testify remotely, sign up to testify remotely. And if you can submit written testimony, please do that as well. Be specific. Use the information we shared in this video. We went over this bill in depth. Look over the bill yourself. Use that specific information to express your heartfelt concerns to your representatives and help them understand this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. This is certainly not a gay versus straight issue or an atheist versus Christian issue. This is about caring for human dignity and well-being in the long term. And we have people like Sarah, who medically went through these surgeries and hormones a long time ago, who are speaking out against this and joining notorious TERFs like me because because we care about human health, welfare, and dignity. And gender dysphoria has become a social contagion, but it is treatable psychologically. We do not need to submit people to irreversible medical procedures that will keep them medical patients for life and increase their risk of suicide by 19 times. So that's the plug. Please say something, especially if you're an Oregonian, especially if you have any personal experience with transition, detransition, transition regret, desistance, any of that, especially if you are a therapist, a doctor, or other type of healthcare provider. We need your input on this bill. So thanks so much for joining us. If you did tune in, this was my first time doing a live stream, so please be patient and forgiving with me, and leave your comments to let me know if you want more of this. And of course, one place that you can go for live streams would be to join my locals community, because I will be doing private members only Q&A live streams responding to your questions in my locals community. Thank you everyone so much. Sarah, it's been a pleasure, and I'm going to bid our audience adieu.
Yeah, I should say that although I don't want to make myself available by email, I do plan to keep speaking out about this and
Okay.
try to get what I've written published by somebody. I sent the longer piece that I sent you. I sent that to Barry Weiss's what's it called? The Free Press.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
Free Press. They politely declined.
Okay.
Might
Well,
have been
if
too angry. I've gone over that so many times because I don't want it to sound angry because that turns people off.
so if you
Right.
decide after this call, because we're about to stop recording, but if you decide afterward want to provide a certain email address or anything like that, I can always add that to the YouTube description. All right, but I'm going to wrap up the call and just press